We are dealing with a sage called Sumchus, and whether or not he fits with our Mishnah. So I know that there's a lot of revision, and we keep revising the things again and again and again. It's the only way to consolidate. So let's remind ourselves. The Mishnah that we're dealing with is a Mishnah about two individuals who arrive in a Beis Din, each one clinging to the edge of a tallis, except this tallis is not from shul. Tallis in this context is just a garment. So these two guys walk into the Beis Din, they're holding on to the tallis. It's a tug of war, and each one is saying, you know what? You know why I'm here? You know why I'm here? Because this thing belongs to me, and that son of a gun is trying to take it away from me. That's why I'm here. And the Mishnah said there are two scenarios of how that could have happened. The one scenario is that this tallis, this garment, was just lying in the street. Nobody could claim ownership. And these two guys happened to arrive, and they wanted it for themselves. And now the claim is, I picked it up first. Or alternatively, these two guys were at the shop, and it was the last item of its kind on the shelf. And somehow or another, each one of them believes that he's the guy who actually bought it. Okay? Now, in both cases, there are no witnesses. And because there are no witnesses, the Mishnah has told us that each one of them, in the absence of hard evidence, is going to have to prove the case a different way. How do you prove your case differently? You do what is called a shavua. What's a shavua? An oath. And an oath is a very serious business. To take an oath, you have to really believe what you're saying. You're going to invoke Hashem's name. You're going to hold a Torah scroll. They're going to read you the riot act and tell you how terrible it is if you invoke Hashem's name in vain, and that heaven and earth will all fall to pieces, basically, if you know. And if you're still willing to stick by your story, and you're willing to take the oath, then we will split the value of this garment between the two of you. That's our Mishnah. We had a few questions about our Mishnah. We tested a few things about our Mishnah. But the current section of Gemorah that we're talking about is interested in this issue. Our Mishnah has no names of any rabbis in it. If there's a Mishnah that has no name of any specific rabbi in it, the implication is all the rabbis are on the same page. Now, I know that sounds unusual, but that's the implication, that all the rabbis are on the same page. What the Gemorah is now doing is testing if that is valid. So what we're going to do is we're going to look around the entire Gemorah, and we're going to see if there are any scenarios that sound similar to the scenario in our Mishnah. And then we're going to see if the rabbis in those discussions arrive at the same conclusions as our Mishnah. And if we think they don't, we're going to raise a red flag and say, there's a clash. Why is the clash not mentioned in our Mishnah? So we previously did this with a rabbi called Ben Nanas, and that was a relatively easy thing to put to bed. Now we're doing it with a rabbi called Sumchus, and he has kept us busy for a number of weeks, and we still have not put this thing to bed. Why? Well, first of all, because when the Gemorah raised the issue that Sumchus has an opinion that is different to or in conflict with our Mishnah, the Gemorah said, whoa, hang on a second. Sumchus was not speaking in an echo chamber. There were other rabbis debating with him. And guess what? Those other rabbis also don't seem to align with our Mishnah. We were able to put that to bed quite easily. The rabbis we were able to settle quite easily. Sumchus remains a big issue for us. So we're going to now just quickly review what's the issue, how did we attempt to resolve it, why that resolution hasn't stood, and then where we are now. Okay? So here's the story. Remember, our Mishnah is effectively, if you boil it down to its key components, it's effectively a story of two people making counterclaims over an object that is worth something, and nobody's got any witnesses. So the court is saying, let's deal with that. How do we deal with it? Take an oath. Sumchus deals with similar cases. We're going to just focus on one of them. Similar cases, which is two people are in conflict about an item that is worth money. Each one's making a claim that they cannot prove, And yet, Mashiach has arrived, and yet, the conclusion there of how the court should deal with it is totally different to our case. So let's review the case, and then we'll look at how Sumchus deals with it. Then we'll compare it to our Mishnah and see if we can resolve it. So what was the case? Who remembers? What's the case?
Two people holding
That's our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is two people holding onto a tallis. What's the case that Sumchus is talking about? Pregnant cow. The attack on the pregnant cow sounds like almost like the name of a novel. The goring of Daisy. So what happened? There is a person who owns an ox, and there's a person who owns a cow. The cow is pregnant. The ox attacks, gores, and kills the cow. It's the ox's first offense. And that's important, because if it's a first offense, then we don't expect that the owner would have secured his ox, because he didn't expect his ox to attack. And therefore, the owner is only liable for half the damage caused. Our question is, how much damage was caused? Because when the bovine detectives arrive at the scene, there is not just a dead cow, but there's also an aborted fetus next to the cow. The question is, does the owner of the ox have liability to pay for the loss of that fetus? The argument would be, well, because that fetus only aborted because your ox attacked the cow. Or could it be that the baby was born just before the attack and just didn't survive because it was a miscarriage, and it's got nothing to do with the ox that gored? So what's the amount that's in question? The value of the fetus. The amount of the cow is not in question. He's definitely liable for 50% of the value of that cow. That's not a question. The question is the fetus. Can anybody prove it? No. Nobody was there. Nobody saw what happened. Sounds very much like our Mishnah. There is an amount of money that is in dispute, and neither side can prove their case. So what do we do with that in our Mishnah? We say, take an oath, split the amount between you. What does Sumchus say in that scenario with the pregnant cow? No oath. Just split the money. Sounds like a conflict. Sounds like the same kind of case, but his ruling and our Mishnah's rulings are not the same. So therefore, that sounds like a conflict. Why is Sumchus not a dissenting voice in our Mishnah? So we said, whoa. What are you going to say, Yossi?
It's a different case.
It's a different case. The easiest answer that we said was a different case. Why is it a different case? Why is it a different case?
They can't say what happened.
Exactly. Because in that case, by their own admission, the two litigants, by their own admission, say, we don't know what happened. So if you don't know what happened, how can I, as a court, make you swear, tell me what happened? That would be ridiculous. You're telling me you don't know what happened. And I'm going to say to you, we'll promise that it doesn't make any sense. Whereas in our case, each person is saying, I know exactly what happened, and that other guy's a crook. You know exactly what happened. Take an oath. Clearly different cases, right? That's all fine and good, except there was a sage in the Gemorah called Rabba bar Rav Huna. And Rabba bar Rav Huna says, actually, as far as Sumchus is concerned, it makes no difference whether your claim is made with certainty or without certainty. Sumchus would still not require an oath. In other words, according to Rabba bar Rav Huna, if each guy said, I know exactly what happened, I saw that attack, and I saw that your ox is the reason my cow miscarried. And the other guy says, no, I saw the attack, and you were looking from the wrong angle, and I saw a different angle, and I saw that fetus was already miscarried before the attack happened. Sumchus would still say, no oath. So, according to Rabba bar Rav Huna, how do we reconcile the opinion of Sumchus with our Mishnah? That's where we got up to last week. And then, last week we introduced a concept called derara de mamona. And we had a look at Rashi and Tosfos, remember? We said that there's an opinion of Rashi, there's an opinion of Tosfos. This is on page 17, I think, right? Yeah, page 17. that there's an opinion of Rashi and an opinion of Tosafos of what exactly we mean by this concept of Gemorah Demamina. But for today's conversation, we're going to keep it simple. Potential to cause financial loss by ruling incorrectly. Okay? Potential to cause financial loss by ruling incorrectly. So, if the courts, in the case of the ox that attacked the cow, if the courts make the two sides take an oath, is it possible that somebody's going to lose money because we ruled inappropriately? In other words, is it possible that the outcome of that process, so again, this guy says you owe me for the fetus, that guy says I don't owe you for the fetus, if the court had to say each of you swear to support your claim, could that potentially make somebody lose money?
Yes, because
Of course.
they're lying.
Nobody's lying.
No, the contact it on if they did not see what happened.
So then they won't take the oath.
Okay.
No, keep going.
But if they take the oath, they're lying.
No, not if they take the oath. Okay, let's go back a step. In the way that I've described what an oath is, that you've got to use Hashem's name and you've got to hold a Torah scroll, and then they give you this whole schmooze about how serious this is and that you could potentially undo the creation of heaven and earth, all that stuff. How keen would you be to take an oath? Not keen.
Why? Why not?
Why?
If you're confident enough that you know exactly what you're saying and what you believe, why should you hesitate to take that?
I'll tell you exactly why. Have you ever met Jewish people? Is it not fair to say that there are plenty of people in our communities who would avoid doing something even if they believe that they are justified to do it because it could bring them an ayin hara? Has that ever happened in the Jewish world? Like, I know I could do, but I don't want to go there, I don't want to do this, I don't want to attract negative, for sure, right?
Sure.
And that's not nearly as serious as taking an oath with Hashem's name. In other words, there are certain people there who say, I don't want to touch this with a barge pole. The concept, it's one of the 10 commandments, do not take the Lord's name in vain. You know, it's like a really serious thing. I don't want to go there. I'd rather forfeit the money than have Hashem's name in my mouth under oath. That's where they'd be coming from. Okay? And I'm 100% secure in my claim. I don't want to use God for my claim. Like, I have too much respect for Hashem to drag Hashem into the courtroom, to drag Hashem into and people are going to think like that. And that's where the Gemorah Demamina comes from. If I'm going to impose an oath, that might scare the legitimate claimant off his claim, because he'll be too scared to take Hashem's name, and then he's going to lose money. So in that case, which is like the case of the ox and the cow, where somebody could lose money, because could be that the owner of the ox owes me the money for the fetus, could be. But it could be that I don't feel confident enough, or I am too respectful of Hashem to take the oath, so I'm going to back off, and so your ruling, says Sumchus, is going to cause him to lose money. I'm not willing to do that. I'm not willing to invoke the oath for my clarity with the potential of that person losing their money. In our Mishnah, nobody can lose money. Why can nobody lose money? Because we haven't yet established ownership over this garment. You can't lose something you don't yet have. The whole point of this claim is to try establish ownership in the first place. So there's no risk in the oath. If the guy shies away from the oath, okay, you are no worse off than before you found this thing lying on the ground. So there's no risk of financial loss. I'm not afraid to apply an oath, even if that oath might scare everybody off. That's the distinction that the Gemorah wants to make, right? The Gemorah wants to say, if there is a potential of financial loss, Sumchus says, let's not create a legal framework that might weaken somebody's option to make a claim. That's where we got to last week. Now the fun begins. Especially because a bunch of the notes have gone missing. So those people who do not have notes, you might want to look over somebody's shoulder so you could see what's going on. Okay. We are firstly, as we always like to do, we're just going to have a look at some vocabulary. Okay? So it's page 18 now. Page 18. You'll see this is not a Hebrew word. This is an Aramaic word. Does anybody know what the Aramaic word mar means? Because we know what it is in Hebrew, right? The Aramaic word mar. Anybody know what it is?
But
Not but? No,
That's
that's Hebrew.
Afrikaans is mar.
Yeah.
That's Mara, no?
Huh? Master. Okay? Mar is master. Okay? Now, you know when you want to speak respectfully to somebody and you say sir? So Mar is kind of equivalent in this conversation. So we're not going to say so and so says and so says, or that this is going to impact so and it's going to impact so and so. We'll say the word Mar. It's a little bit more respectful. Okay? In this particular case, part of what we're going to examine is there are two Marim, there are two sirs in this case, i.e. the two claimants. So it's going to be Mar this and Mar that. Or Mar is going to be affected in this way and Mar is going to be affected in that way. Okay? The next phrase is an extremely useful phrase to know. But before we do it, before we do the phrase, let me ask you this. Are you familiar with the different mechanics that we're allowed to use in order to interpret a verse in the Torah? That there's all these different mechanisms that you could use. One of them is called a kal v'chomer. Okay? What's a kal v'chomer?
If this, then how much more that?
Correct. So I love it because usually when you ask yeshiva bochrim or high school students what's a kal v'chomer, they say it's a how much more so. That's like a very yeshivish way of saying it, right? It's a how much more so. And then if you ask the people who are like really academic, they say it's an a fortiori argument, which nobody understands, right? So essentially the principle of kal v'chomer is this. Kal means the easier or lighter case, and chomer is the stronger or more severe case. So the logic says if something applies in the kal case, it certainly must apply in the chomer case. That's the logic behind it. That's why they call it a how much more so, right? So it's a really, really important logical process to use. Let's use a very simple example first, and then we'll gradually move across to something more related to what we're talking about. So let's say this. If I would be able to ride the 94.7, which obviously, then Charlie definitely could ride the 94.7, right? That's a kal v'chomer, because I'm not a cyclist and he is a very good cyclist. So kal v'chomer, right? I'm the lesser case. I'm the lesser case, the less likely case, right? And you're the more likely case. So if the less likely case can produce a result, the more likely case certainly can produce a result. See how the logic goes? Okay, here's another one.
I'll give you one. If I know the law, how much more so would you know the law? Mishnah. Yeah, Gemorah.
Right? Okay. So, got it? All right. Now let's use another example. Let's say if I have a concern, I'm going to sit in the seat of Sumchus for a moment. If I have a concern that a particular legal process could prejudice a claimant, and therefore I don't want to use that process because it could prejudice him, then certainly if there's a legal process that definitely will prejudice him, I'd obviously say don't use it. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So if I'm steering clear of the potential prejudice, I'm definitely going to steer clear of the definite prejudice. Make sense? Okay. So let's look at the construction of this expression. It goes like this. You're going to see the expression number one, Uma Hasam. Uma, and what, right? Uma, and what? But really what we mean is, and what about? And what about? Hasam, does anybody remember what the word Hasam means? Hasam means there. There's the other case, not the case. So our Mishnah would be, Hacha would be here, and Hasam would be the other case that we had brought in for reference. Okay? So Ma Hasam. If over there in that case, Sumchus took a particular position, and in that case, there was less risk, or there was more logic to say that it would be okay to put in this legal structure, etc., and yet he didn't, then certainly Hacha, Here, in our case, that I could show you our case, there's much greater risk, or there's much more logic not to invoke that particular procedure. Loi kol shekain. Is that not all the more reason to apply his logic? Okay, are you following? So basically what we're saying, that's just the language to illustrate the point. If there, in the lesser case, he was so strict, here in the stringent case, he should certainly be. That's essentially what we're doing. Okay. So you really got to just hold tight for a few minutes, because we're going to piece together the Gemorah's logic. So the Gemorah has just said Sumchus would not want to use an oath if the oath might scare off a claimant and potentially cause him to lose his money as a result. Sumchus doesn't want a legal procedure that could make you lose money. Therefore, no oath in that case. Says the Gemorah, is that so? Is that so? Let's see. Velav kal v'chomer hu. The logic you've just used as to why Sumchus did not invoke an oath in the ox versus cow case, is that not all the more reason why he should say no oath in our case? Okay, so that's the proposal. We're going to say, if there's no oath, certainly here there's no oath. Now we've got to work out the logic why. Why would you think that's so certain? Why is it such a radical statement to say, kal v'chomer? So what we're going to do is examine that case versus examining this case. Umah Hassam. Let's consider the case over there with the ox and the cow. Up until now, I've actually misinformed you. Why have I misinformed you? Let's go back. We said that Sumchus does not want to use the oath because one claimant could lose money, right? Which claimant? The guy who's he's technically the claimant, right? The guy whose cow was attacked, he might lose out getting paid for his fetus if he's too afraid to take the oath. Says the Gemorah, whoa, one second. You're making this sound like only one person in that case, only one litigant could potentially lose money. Let's just talk for a second. If we rule incorrectly in favor of the victim, then we're making the perpetrator lose money. In other words, if that fetus is not dead because of the ox, but we get the ruling wrong, and we make him pay for the value of the fetus, he's lost money. On the other hand, if we get it wrong in the other direction, if the reason that fetus is dead is because of the attack of his ox, and we don't protect the victim, and we don't ensure that the victim gets his money, he's going to lose money. In other words, that scenario was a scenario where both litigants are potential financial losers. Both of them could walk out of this case saying, that wasn't fair. Something was taken from me that shouldn't have been taken from me. Right? Not only that. So I've got these two people, right? I've got the owner of the ox, and I've got the owner of the cow and its fetus. So for the purpose of the next piece of this conversation, let's call it the owner of the ox and the owner of the fetus, because that's really what's in dispute. Is it possible? Let's put a value on it because we'll make it easier for us. So let's say the amount of money in question that either should or should not be paid. Let's just say it's 10,000 rand. That's the value of the fetus, let's just say. Is it possible that all 10,000 rand of that belongs to the owner of the fetus? Is that possible? It is. How would that be the case? If the ox is the reason the fetus died. Is it possible that all 10,000 rand belongs to the owner of the ox? Of course it is. If it wasn't his ox that caused the fetus to die.
He just didn't have to pay it. It wasn't his money.
It's his money that he's not paying. So if it's his money that he's not paying, then all 10,000 is his. In other words, let's not get stuck in the movement of the money from one to the other. Right? Again, so we're going to look at two tiers over here. Is it possible that the owner of the ox could lose 10,000 rand, he's not legally required to pay. Is that possible?
Yes.
It is possible, because we don't have hard evidence. Is it possible that the owner of the fetus could lose the value of that fetus, which is 10,000 rand, because we don't get the ox person to pay him, right? It's possible. So they both stand to lose. Now, how much do they stand to lose? They each stand to lose 100% of the value in question. Because if we make the guy pay, when the reality of the story is he should never have paid, he lost 10,000 rand. The entire amount should have been his, and he lost it all. Alternatively, if we don't award the victim the money, then what we've done is that the victim, who by right should have had all 10,000 rand, has lost all 10,000 rand. You see how there's two tiers over here. We're looking both from the perspective of what they stand to lose and from the perspective of how much of the quantum in question could potentially belong to either one of them. There's a 100% profit loss equation for both sides of this argument, right? In other words, there's a lot at stake here. There's a lot at stake. And you would think that if there's a lot at stake, pull out every resource that you have available to get the truth out of these people. I don't have the resource of witnesses, so what's the next best resource? An oath. Where's the oath, Sumchas? Such a high stakes game where each guy potentially could be losing a lot of money. And each guy potentially could claim that the full version of their money is theirs. And you're not bringing out the big guns to get the truth out of them. Now let's compare that to our case. In our case, how much does somebody stand to lose if we rule wrong?
Potentially nothing.
Nothing. You cannot use the word lose, right? You cannot use the word lose about something you haven't yet got. The whole purpose of this court case is to try and establish ownership. If we haven't established ownership, nobody can lose anything. So, how high are the stakes?
Not high at all.
Not high at all. Plus, is either side claiming that 100% belongs to them?
In the Tallis.
In the Tallis.
Yeah.
They are, right? And yet, when we make them take the oath, we're not willing to put those words in their mouth. They have to say, no less than half. So the stakes are even lower. So it doesn't make sense. In the high stakes case, you're not willing to put them through the mill and make them take an oath, but in the low stakes case, you are. How does that work, Sumchus? That doesn't seem to make sense.
Could it be that they can't be sure
Exactly.
on the calf? I mean, how
They
could
don't-
they
in all
can't
these
take
different
an
options.
oath because they can't know. But on the Tallis, with all their belief, they could. I mean, that's how they perceive it. That's how.
True.
Know it.
So you're reverting back to the technicality that we mentioned previously, which was they don't know, right? But we are at this point having the conversation through the lens of Rabba Bar Rav Huna, who says the same law would apply even if they claimed they did know. Okay? So for sure, according to everybody else's understanding of Sumchus, it's a slam dunk. It's easy because here they claim they know, and in that case they claim they don't know, so therefore here you can make an oath and there you can't. But this conversation is in the very hyper-specific opinion of Rabbi Bar Rav Huna, who says, I'm telling you Sumchus would rule the same way even if they claim they did know. Okay, well if they claim they do know, make them take an oath, especially when there's such high stakes, especially when somebody could be really hard done by if we don't do due process, and somebody could really lose money that they should have got. If you're willing to invoke an oath on people who quite frankly are just a nuisance to the court, what do you have to come slip? Go sort it out yourself. You're both arguing over a windfall. I mean, what kind of petulant young people are you? You know what I'm saying?
The difference in the case, the one has got damages, the other one doesn't.
Right.
So they're not the same thing.
They're not the same thing, exactly. But in concept of let's use the resources at our disposal to protect the victim or protect justice, and we're not. So if they were comfortable just to let that resource go and kind of because remember his conclusion is split the money between them, which is effectively our conclusion in our Mishnah. So what do we need the oath for in our Mishnah? In the high stakes case, where by saying you're only getting 50% of the money, you are potentially cheating this guy out of 50% of a loss, a painful personal loss that he had. And you're willing to do that without an oath. So for these two guys who are fighting over this verstunkene tallis that they found in the street, now you're bringing out the big guns. Now you're insisting on an oath. It doesn't seem to make sense.
Yes.
There should be a kol v'chama.
Because
That's the kabbalah.
because that will give people the idea that they can go and grab somebody stuff and say it's mine.
Excellent. Great. Hold that thought. Excellent. Excellent. Hold that thought. Okay, you're ready to build this. You're ready to build this into the words. Now that we've got the high level conceptually, let's build it into the words. V'lav kal v'chomer hu. Can we not apply the logic of a kal v'chomer, which is that if there you don't need an oath, surely here you don't need an oath. Why? Because of Mahasam, let's look at the case over there. What was the case over there? Dikadrora demamana lemar. The one person stands to lose money. We'll call him the victim. The victim stands to lose money if he's not compensated for his loss. Ve'ikadrora demamana lemar. And there is the potential of the other person losing money. If we call him the aggressor without real proof and make him pay for something his ox didn't do, then he'd be losing money. So there is an equal risk of financial loss to each side. That's layer one. Layer two, there's sound logic to say the full amount in question belongs to the victim because Nebuch, he lost his fetus. And therefore, there's logic to say he should get the full amount of money that will cover the loss of that fetus. Or you could argue conversely that kula lemar, that actually all of the money should remain in the pocket of the perpetrator because there's no hard evidence that he actually owes a cent, and why make somebody pay for something you cannot absolutely prove he owes? So there's potential financial loss to each, and there's a logic to say each one of them deserves everything that's at stake over here. Despite all of that, Sumchus was willing to say, Mammon amutal b'safek, that if you have money which is in conflict, in doubt, being fought over, cholkin, you split it between the two parties, beloi shvua, without an oath, even though there's the risk of all this damage. So hacha, let's compare that to our case here. Delekadrara demamana, nobody's going to lose any money. And not only is nobody going to lose any money, there's actually logic to say that the tallis belongs to both of them equally. Because what do I see as the judge? There's an expression that ein ledayan elo ma she'ein of royos. A judge can only judge by what is presented to him. What does he see? Two people equally holding onto a garment. So there isn't logic to say the garment belongs to one versus the other. The logic is to say it should be 50-50. Again, in that case, either you are guilty for the fetus or you're not. So either the money all belongs to the victim or none of it belongs to the victim. Whereas here, as I see the case in front of me as the judge, looks to me like it should be 50-50. In other words, it's much easier, surely, in our case, to split the value of the tallis between them. So loy kol sheket, is that not all the more reason why we don't have to schlep them through an oath? Surely. Why do you need an oath? An oath is to protect people. Who do I have to protect you? Nobody stands to lose. And what I'm awarding them is what my eyes tell me they should be getting. Half a tallis each. Why do I need an oath? Got it? That is our big Sumchus final blow question. Right? Okay, at this point, you really cannot seem to reconcile the logic of Sumchus with the logic of our Mishnah. Until we get to the last piece of this whole Sumchus saga, which has lasted now for a number of weeks, literally like a mini-series. And really, the Gemorah should be saying, Rabbi Yosef answered, but it's not. It's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Not Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, sorry, Rabbi Yochanan. It's not Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, it's Rabbi Yochanan. Now, before we go here, there's a few things we have to know. Number one, not all oaths are created equally. Okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? The Torah specifies, actually it's in this week's parasha, the Torah specifies certain oaths that you have to take. So let's say, for example, that a person lodges a financial complaint against somebody else, and the respondent says, look, I admit that I owe you money, it's just not the amount that you're claiming. So the guy says, you owe me $100,000, and he says, it's not true, I only owe you 50. The Torah mandates that the respondent is now going to have to take an oath. So that is what we call Shavuas Hashem. That's what the Torah calls it in this week's parasha. An oath of Hashem. It's what we call in halacha a shvua mid'oraisa, a shvua that is an oath that is mandated by the Torah. Now, an oath that is mandated by the Torah is the highest form of oath, and it is a very serious thing, and it invokes Hashem's name, and all of that stuff with the Torah and everything that we've described. There is a different kind of oath, which is dirabbanon. Under certain circumstances, the rabbis impose an oath on somebody because we don't have another mechanism to squeeze the truth out of them. And that kind of oath is not as severe as an oath mandated by the Torah, but it's still a very serious thing because perjury is a very serious sin in Judaism. So even if it's not using Hashem's name and holding the Torah and all that kind of thing, it's still a very serious business. Up until now, our entire understanding of this Mishnah was that the oath that will be administered is that highest level of oath. We're about to discover that that's not the case. We're about to discover that this is a rabbinically instituted oath that was designed for a very specific purpose. When you understand what the purpose is, you understand why it's applied in our Mishnah and would have no relevance in the Mishnah of the ox and the pregnant cow. Okay? So this is a major twist in the tale, right? Major twist in the tale. And this is exactly how Gemorah works. Gemorah will take a working theory as we've seen, for weeks of discussion, so that we can explore a whole lot of halachic perspectives, and at the end of that say, that was all valid learning, but it's actually not the practicality of this case. That's what's about to happen here. So once you know that this is a rabbinically ordained oath, and you know what the parameters of this oath are, everything changes. Okay. So here's the vocab for this piece. The first word, easy to work out. Mi derabbanon. What does that mean? Rabbinic. Okay, good. The synonym for that is takonas chachamim. It is an institution of the rabbis. Meaning to say, something that the rabbis invented because they wanted to deal with a specific kind of problem, so therefore they invented this particular kind of oath. Okay? And we're going to see over here, there's the root tof, kuf, pei, takaf. What does takaf mean? To attack or to grab. Tokef is strength. So to grab something away from something else, in Gemorah language is tokaf. The other thing that you have to know is, when we prove something, very often we'll say, ke de rabbi, so-and-so de omar. This concept we're about to teach is based on the teaching of so-and-so who said X and Y. So look at the final conclusion of the Gemorah. Afilu, tema, sumchus. At the end of the day, we can always reconcile our Mishnah and its insistence on an oath with the opinion of Sumchus, who is willing to give or to divide an asset without an oath. Why? Because shvozoi mi derabbanon. Because the oath described in our Mishnah is a rabbinic oath, not a Torah oath. Where did this rabbinic oath come from? Ke de Rabbi Yochanan. That information we get from Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is the person who put together the Jerusalem Talmud. He's considered one of the great halachic authorities. Rabbi Yochanan says, Dama Rabbi Yochanan said, Shvua Zoy Takonos Chachamim Hi. This particular oath is an institution of the rabbis. Why? Shelo Yehei Kol Echad Ve'echad Hoylech V'Toikev V'Talisa Shel Chaveroi. So let's break that down into pieces. Shelo Yehei Kol Echad Ve'echad, that we should never have a scenario where individuals go, Hoylech, go, V'Toikev, and grab, Betalisa shel chaveroi, an object, in this case a garment that belongs to somebody else, v'oimer sheli hu, and claim it to be theirs. In other words, Sumchus would be of the view, as Rabbi Yochanan is of the view, that humans, as we learned earlier on in this Gemorah, are quick to justify their behavior. And the minute you see that somebody's had a bit of muzzle, the human response is, let's share the love. Not share the love, I want to share the love with you, you share the love with me. So it's quite common in a person's mind, not necessarily in a person's behavior, but in a person's mind, it's quite common for a person to say, you know what, I see this happening. There's this thing lying on the floor, he's 3 seconds ahead of me, so he's going to get it first. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to grab it also. And what's going to happen if I grab it also is, inevitably, either we'll make a compromise or we'll go to the courts. And the courts say, Mammon hamutu b'safek, this is Sumchus thinking, Mammon hamutu b'safek, that anytime you have an asset that's in question, Chol can split it between the two, and guess what? I'm going to get 50%. So to prevent that, the rabbis instituted an oath. Now this oath is not a Torah oath, so it doesn't carry that level of gravitas, but it's an oath nonetheless. And an oath is something that the courts will make sure you take seriously. They'll do the whole formula, swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, all that stuff, except they'll do it in the Jewish way. And that's supposed to be that moment of conscience for the guy who got carried away with his impulsive behavior, to just say, whoa, okay, you know what? It was all fun outside of the courts, but now that I'm facing a judge, I'm not so sure that I want to play this game any longer. If that's the case, then such an oath only applies in the scenario of our Mishnah. It has no relevance in any other case that doesn't look like our Mishnah, where there's the temptation of nabbing something that somebody else has got. So, for example, when the ox gores the cow, there's no impulsive side to say, let's share the profits. This is a fight for, I want what's owing to me. It's a completely different psychology. This is specifically the psychology of the person who says, I'm jumping on the bandwagon, and the courts are going to say, not so fast. Okay? And that concludes our Sumchus discussion.
Just like that.
At the beginning,
Just like that.
At the beginning, though, you said it was two honest men. Now
Yes.
you're saying one of them is not honest.
No, you're 100% right. That's exactly the point. If a person was not honest, the oath would have no effect on them, especially because this is not a Torah-based oath. And that's exactly the point. Honest people can do things that are completely dishonest without recognizing that they are dishonest.
The
That's
question is that the oath wouldn't, the scenario doesn't apply. What you're saying doesn't apply. As I understood, you said it to us, because you said it's two people genuinely believe that they grabbed this
Correct.
Tallis at the same time. Now
Correct.
you're saying, well, one was just kind of jumping on the back.
No, he really
believes
believes he has the right to do so, because he's not thinking completely rationally. So this concept of
Then he's not an honest person.
no, he is. He's an honest. If you ask him, he's an honest person. He's just in that moment experiencing confirmation bias or some other kind of a bias. In other words, it's really simple. It's really, really simple. Are we honest around this table? Are we honest people? Of course we are. Right? Of course we're honest. And despite that, we regularly do things that technically are not honest. Right? Regularly. Without thinking that they're dishonest. We just think they're necessary to get ahead in life. So it could be, for example, the person who says, do you mind if I just go ahead of you in the queue because I'm under pressure? You know, like when you're standing at the security line in the airport and everybody's my flight's boarding. That person doesn't believe they're dishonest. That person actually believes that they probably are boarding before those other people, and therefore they deserve the right to push their way through the line. That's what we're describing over here. We're not describing somebody who's actually doing a dishonest thing. We're not describing a person who believes that what they're doing is not that they actually deserve. They actually believe they deserve it because of the circumstances.
Then why would the oath take it that genuinely
Because the
believe?
oath is the wake-up call. The oath is the wake-up call to say, do you genuinely believe that there's nothing inappropriate in your thought process? And very often in life, we need those checks just to bring us back to our value system. So it's not like we've lost our value system, but we've kind of just veered a little bit from our value system temporarily.
Yeah, and to prevent people having
True, exactly. That's an excellent point, because knowing that that's the procedure may well be preventative in the first place. Like, if I know I'm going to go down that route, that's my reminder that I shouldn't be doing this.
But I disagree with that, though. And I'll tell you why. Because, I mean, if I understood you correctly, maybe I must take a step back and see that I got it correctly. The rabbinical oath that you are saying is the respondent has to take that oath.
Both
Have to.
Both have to. Yeah.
You said
Both parties. Both parties, because we don't have, in this case, we don't have a claimant and a respondent. In this case, we have two people making equal claims with nobody to prove the one versus the other. So they are on absolutely equal footing. Therefore, they have to both take the same oath.
The interesting one for me is that, in theory, the defendant, by not getting the tallis, he actually has lost. You're saying he hasn't lost anything.
We can't lose something until you got it.
Yeah, but think
He's
about
lost opportunity. It's an opportunity cost. It's an opportunity cost. Yeah.
So even if you put it as financial terms, let's say he buys it for 10,000, it's worth 20,000. He's lost the ability.
Correct, 100%. So that's a whole different conversation in halacha. The concept of opportunity cost, or loss of opportunity, or loss of potential. But that's not what we're discussing over here. Over here, we're looking purely from an ownership perspective. Until ownership is established, you cannot claim loss of ownership.
But he also wants. They both want the tallis.
Oh yes, they do.
So someone's losing the tallis.
Somebody in his mind is feeling hard done by, which is different to actually legally losing the tallis.
But he doesn't get the tallis.
Correct. So that's what I'm saying. In his mind, in his psychology, a terrible thing has happened.
He actually loses that tallis. There's only one tallis left in the shop.
So he lost the right to get that tallis. He hasn't lost the tallis.
He doesn't have it before.
You can't lose something you don't
But
get.
here's a corollary. If there's such a concept, and I don't know if there is in terms of rabbinical law or halacha or whatever it is, that the person who alleges must prove.
Yes, that's according to the rabbis that disagree with Simchus.
So the person that brings the claim has the onus to actually prove it.
Absolutely. That's
So
why
in
in this
other words,
case, nobody's bringing the claim. They're both walking into the court equally. This was how we dealt with the other opinion that disagreed with Simchus, and why that was aligned with our Mishnah. Because they'll say that the burden of proof is always on the claimant.
Sure.
Here there's no claimant per se. Here there's just two people who...
Two claimants.
Well, they both are claimants and respondents
Yeah, sure.
in equal measure.
Yeah.
So there's no clear claiming from, therefore onus of proof.
Also, to be clear, how do we know Simchus just is more trusting of people? He says, "Listen, I'm why are we discounting?"
That's a great question. That's a great question. And considering that there are various cases in the Gemorah where Simchus presents his view in different scenarios, you can assume that the Gemorah unpacks a lot more information about his opinion. That we're just focused on one aspect of his opinion, which is relevant to our Mishnah.
But then,